There's no question ever about who the greatest comedian is. It's never anything other than Richard Pryor.
They created the 5-second delay on Saturday Night Live because of Richard Pryor. They said he was a loose cannon.
You ever notice how nice white people get when there's a bunch of niggas around? Right, they get outside, they talk to everybody, right? They say, hi, how you doing? I don't know you, but here's my wife, hello!
He was not trying to be the proper black man. Richard Pryor was very much trying to be a nigger.
Richard Pryor was born on the edge. Imagine being born in a brothel. People weren't comfortable with where he was coming from. And Rich was like, but this is where I'm from. This is what I've been through. This is my life. I'm gonna tell it.
Richard Pryor, the comedian, was badly burned in an accident at his home in California last night. They are severe enough to endanger his life.
I don't know whether it's attempted suicide, was it an accident, incident, whatever, it happened, and it made him even bigger.
This program is made possible in part by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Richard Pryor walked you through his life and you saw it. He put you right there. You was on the corner with the wino. You was on the corner. My government name is Tracy Morgan. I'm a human being and I'm funny. He never lied to us. When you listen to Richard Pryor talk on stage, it was just a funny conversation. And that's what attracted me to stand up. If I'm gonna tell a story on stage, it's gonna be with detail and color.
You know, I learned my honesty and I learned my ability to connect with audiences and to be vulnerable through watching Richard Pryor. I'm not very religious, but I don't hang on the Pope's every word. I know people that do, and that must be what that's like. You know, to have somebody that you see that becomes a kind of a guiding light for you.
Well, Richard Pryor is the comedy icon. He was known everywhere, and he was a true ambassador to comedy. He is mentioned in the same loving reverence as all those other great humanitarians that weren't comedians.
What other comedians do I think Richard Pryor influenced? Are you crazy? You name me a comedian had to, through some way, have been influenced by Richard Pryor, because we call him the king, we call him the greatest. From Robin Williams to Robin Harris, J. Anthony Brown, Bruce, Louis C.K., George Carlin, Don Rickles, I know Jerry Seinfeld. You name me a comedian, Carrot Top, everybody was influenced by Richard Pryor.
For Richard Pryor, his stirring journey that changed the world began the first time he appeared on television. Something a comedian never forgets.
On Broadway tonight, for the first time on television, Richard Pryor.
The very first time I was ever on TV doing stand-up, it happened so quick that I didn't even have time to get nervous.
I'm going to tell you a few things about myself, because a lot of you probably don't know me. I'm not a New Yorker. My home's in Peoria, Illinois.
They asked me, did I have 7 minutes? So I said, yeah. They said, go on stage, and I was on stage, so I didn't have time.
I'm from an average type family, 11 kids. No mother and father, just kids.
When you walk on stage now, and you know these people have paid to come see you.
I grabbed the crook. That was the wrong move.
I already know every night before I go on stage, I'm gonna have a good time, whether you like it or not.
He threw me down. I got up. He knocked me down. I got up. He kicked me down. He said, get up. I said, ha, ha, ha.
And the next 5 to 7 minutes is a complete blur. It's out of body experience. I remember at one point I was up above myself, looking down at me, doing stand-up.
Then my wife threw him across the furniture. She slapped me. The police came. She beat them up. They took her away. Me and the crook living happily ever after.
And if you did well, the next day, you know, it all changes.
Even when he was supposedly square and legit, his heart was still in the streets. Dr. Todd Boyd, professor of critical studies, USC School of Cinematic Arts. This sort of perspective of a black man from this generation who's connected to the streets And how you use language to sort of communicate this was very familiar to me. Richard Pryor is interesting because he's someone who's from the Midwest and sort of moved through various low-level circuits in the Midwest, eventually made his way into New York.
At ease. That's right, I'm tired of telling you guys over and over. Every time I turn around, I gotta tell you. The torpedo tube's on the left, the laboratory's on the right.
You can take all the rancor out of it, you can take all the misogyny out of it, and you still have a very, very funny man. My name is Cecil Brown. I am a friend of Richard Pryor. The comedy of Richard Pryor is universal. That kind of humor addresses the new millennium very well, very well. The type of comedy Richard was doing when I first met him was called white bread humor. No curse words, no references to anything such as race, sex, or drugs.
Last week we was watching television. I heard a knock on the door. I said to my wife, "There's a knock on the door."
Richard starts out as a person imitating Bill Cosby.
To be great, you gotta study the greats. Bill Cosby was inspiration for Richard Pryor.
You know, this skinny guy, and this like, you know, suit that's too big. Richard Pryor was trying to be the best he could be.
I like New York City. I've been working in the village in coffee houses. And I like it because they don't serve any booze, just coffee, ice cream, weird pills, and
But then Richard probably thought that he had to be like Bill to be in.
He's not sort of taking a strong political stand. He's not attempting to be confrontational. He's quite the opposite.
He started back in the day when there were no blacks on TV. And it was so long ago, it was only black and white TV. So you had to be either black or white. Either way, you had no choice.
I think he was just finding his way. You want to sell tickets and you want to be popular.
you guys are facetious. What do you say, man? I don't know, you want to kill him?
What can I do to get some of these opportunities that are potentially available?
Here he is, our own little Richie Pryor. Richard.
Pryor's non-offensive physical style is gaining lots of attention. He is now a rising stand-up comic star and a frequent guest on the Merv Griffin syndicated talk show.
Every black person in America watched Richard Pryor.
How you do that, Richard? You just,
I don't know. I just kind of go out there and I just do it. I don't know how.
Because that's all we did. We never saw any black people back then. Everybody would call on the telephone. Everybody would go to everybody's house. If you didn't have a TV, you showed up at somebody's home with a television.
Well, that's MFT. You're under arrest.
now what do we do?
Smoke a cigarette. It tastes good, maybe they smoke well.
And he's funny, but that Richard Pryor is very different than the Richard Pryor who becomes popular in the 1970s. That's almost a different guy.
Despite his meteoric rise to success, Richard Pryor is restless. He is beginning to feel constrained on stage.
He's not fully expressing himself in the way that he would like. He's really an imitator of other comics.
As Pryor continues to perform a Bill Cosby style of comedy, the tastes of American popular culture are now reflecting the swelling tides of social change and unrest. Nowhere was this reflected more than in New York City.
Richard taught me a lot of what not to do. He was definitely a role model of what not to do. He thought I was like the squarest guy on the planet. It was a very vibrant time in New York. There was social activism in the streets. If you weren't doing socially relevant material, you weren't really relevant yourself.
What's happening is this move away from, say, purely physical comedy, gags and stunts and skits, to what we might call more intellectual comedy, more political comedy.
Richard tried to be safe in the beginning. I don't think he found much happiness in trying to be somebody else.
In September 1967, Pryor has what he later would call an epiphany. Pryor was performing at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada.
And he would mention some of the Rat Pack people were sitting watching him.
And the only black guy I was there probably was Sammy Davis Jr. in the audience.
And Richard sort of realizes that he's imitating this very square guy in Bill Cosby. He's not found his own voice.
And he thought their idea of him was of a joke, a ridiculous person.
Comics want to entertain people, but they also want to keep their self-respect.
Kind of boiled over, and when he looked in the audience and saw him telling jokes to people that looked at him odd, I mean, if they're gonna look at you, at least have them look at you as a man.
Your self-respect is being challenged, and you take it very personal.
And Richard said he was so embarrassed that he walked off the stage.
A very important turning point in his career, because this is the moment when he decides the old Richard Pryor is going to be laid to rest.
He walked off the stage in the wrong direction, and they told him, you got to go back across the stage. He said, no, I'm not going back across that stage.
It's almost poetic that this guy who in the next decade will become this huge star arrives at this point by walking away from something. It's working. It's a coming to consciousness. It's a transition from one phase to the next.